Welcome,
Sure.
Dr. Ariel Cohen. Students in my composition 1 and 2 class, plus my science and technical writing class, are going to view this video to expand their perceptions about the world. So students, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Ariel Cohen, who is a famous journalist and commentator for CNN, BBC, NBC, CBS, Al Jazeera, etc. Dr. Cohen has written guest columns for the New York Times, International Herald Tribune, Christian Science Monitor, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Times, and National Review Online, Forbes, etc. Dr. Ariel Cohen is a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council Eurasia Center and a member of the Council of Foreign Relations. Dr. Cohen graduated Bar-Han University Law School in Israel in 1986 with an LLB. In 1989, he received an MA in Law and Diplomacy, and in 1993, a PhD from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy. Dr. Cohen has testified before committees of the U.S. Congress, including the Senate and House Foreign Relations Committees, the House Armed Services Committee, the House Judiciary Committee, and the Helsinki Commission. He has also served as a policy advisor with the National Institute for Public Policy Center for Deterrence Analysis. In addition, Dr. Cohen has consulted for USAID, the World Bank, and the Pentagon. We are so humbled and proud and grateful for you taking your time to share some of your vast knowledge about world affairs with our students here at the University of Toledo. We thank you so much, Dr. Cohen. So we had a list of questions that I sent you, so you can go anywhere you want with them. So let me read the first question. Russia under Putin and the constitutional annulment. Well, as we all know, students know this, in America, a president can only serve for 2 4-year terms. My students may be unaware, however, of policies that other governments have regarding term limits or a presidency. Putin has either been president or prime minister of Russia for 20 years. Why do you think he felt the need to create an amendment that would allow him to stay in power until 2024 or even up to 2026, in spite of the Constitution banning him from running again? Who backed this amendment? What qualities does he possess also that are very czar-like?
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure being with you and your students. I met Putin for the first time in 2004 as a part of a group of international experts that the Russians invited to meet the boss, and were inviting us every year until in 2014. So for 10 years, I was calling it my Hajj, my pilgrimage to Russia with a group of experts to listen to the boss. And I think altogether we met 24 hours between 10 meetings. So I think I got an idea who the guy is. But in 2014, after the invasion of Ukraine, including my birthplace at Crimea, I publicly made a statement that I will not go to these meetings any longer as long as Russia is occupying and annexing parts of the Ukrainian territory, including the Crimea. And it's interesting that a lot of my colleagues in Washington who were very loud in pointing out about the Russian collusion and whatnot, continued to go to these meetings. You know, they would not give up the membership of in the club, despite their criticism of the Russian engagement or involvement in our elections when they were using the 21st century hybrid technologies to influence the elections. The Senate Intelligence Committee just published the 5th volume of their investigation. There's a Mueller report, etc. But we should not think about Mr. Putin as a Western politician.
Right.
He is no elected democratic president.
Right.
In the sense or in the spirit of the American Constitution, the European democratic tradition, or even in the new democracies of Asia, such as Japan, Korea, Taiwan, etc. Putin, as you correctly referenced, is very much in the tradition of the Russian Tsars, to a great degree in the tradition of the Soviet leaders. The Soviet Union, where I grew up, I left at the age of 16, was even more closed, more autocratic, more totalitarian, meaning that more areas of life in the USSR were controlled by state, including religion, including what you could or could not read or say, including travel overseas, including economy. There was no private enterprise at all in the USSR. So Russia is more, in that sense, in the tradition of European autocracies. Think General Franco's Spain, the dictatorship of the 1930s. Think of Mussolini, and less so Hitler. Hitler was a totalitarian dictator, closer to the Stalin's Soviet model.
Yes.
What I'm trying to explain about Putin is that the reason he felt he needs to change the constitution is he's still a lawyer by training. He graduated St. Petersburg, Leningrad Law School in 1975, I believe, and he wants his rule to be based on some kind of a written law. And the law said you cannot occupy the high office in Russia for more than 2 terms in sequence, not 2 terms altogether, 2 terms in sequence. So once he changed now, or as they say in Russia, annulled the constitution, they start the clock again, and there'll be 2 more terms beginning in 2024. So 2 terms of 6 years each, starting in 2024, takes us to 2036.
Right.
When Putin is in his 80s and I will be 77. So think about it. In 2000 till 36, it's 36 years. This is on the par with some longest ruling Russian monarchs, maybe Catherine the Great. I don't remember off the top of my head how long the German princess was in the throne of the Russian Empire, but it was a long time.
It was a long time, and he's planning to be there forever.
Yeah,
right.
And he swims for an hour to an hour and a half.
Oh,
he has one. Yeah, he has one or 2 girlfriends who are much younger. Yes, and he plays hockey. Of course, he always wins. He always puts the highest number of goals when he plays hockey, because they'll let him. But again, this tilting the playing field, not playing by the rules, this is what a KGB officer like Putin is trained to do.
Well, sure, because he was head of the KGB at one time, wasn't he?
He was head of Russia's internal security service.
Internal security,
FSB.
yes.
But yeah,
I mean,
Federal
he's no
Security
choir
Service.
boy. I mean, let's face it, he's no choir boy.
He is no choir boy. He is a 199th level, not a choir boy.
Well, in alignment with that, we want to move on and talk about the revival of Russian great power adventurism. So it
Yeah,
seems from what I've read that President Putin wants to revive the states of the Soviet Union, of the old
right.
Soviet Union, so that he creates a global superpower. So some
Again,
analysts say that Russia's foreign policies are opportunistic, and he selects occasions when and where Russia can play a leading role. Could you please briefly explain to my students what specific occasions and specific locations where these foreign policies and intentions are evident?
absolutely. And I would add that if somebody has a policy of making Russia great again,
Yeah.
that's Putin as an imperialist, a person who believes in empire. And here I cannot help but put a plug for my book called Russian Imperialism.
Of course.
Russian Imperialism, Development and Crisis. It's available in softcover paperback on Amazon. You can get it there. It was used in many courses in many colleges in the United States and elsewhere. And it looks at the history of development of first Russia and then the Soviet Union from the model or perspective of building an empire. And we know till this day, even after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia is still the largest country on earth in terms of a territory, not in terms of population, not in terms of the GDP, but in terms of territory, the biggest country on the planet. And it didn't fall from the sky. They conquered the territory from Moscow further and further, east, west, north, south. And for Putin, the collapse of the Soviet Union was, and I quote, the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century. So to him, it was a traumatic incident. And for many Russians, both supporters of Putin or communists, or even some Democrats, even some people who are closest to us in terms of their viewpoint, the fact that Russia lost its empire, it's very traumatic. And it's understandable for the generation who lived through the loss of the British Empire, of the French Empire, of the whatever was passing for an Italian or Japanese empires. Remember, there was an era of centuries of empire. We, the United States, were a part of the British Empire. That's what we're celebrating on the 4th of July.
Exactly.
So for that generation, it's very traumatic. And I think it's in our interest, it's in American interest, to prevent Russia from becoming an empire again, both, as you said, so it won't become one of these greatest powers, because they see themselves in opposition to us, in opposition to the United States, to our values and to our interests. And you ask a very interesting question. I understand with your background how you pinpoint these questions. Where is he taking the opportunity? Remember, he is a black belt in judo, Putin is. So a black belt in judo, what does he do? He finds a point or a situation to use force, or maybe I'm mixing judo with aikido, but to use force for his advantage or her advantage. And example number one was Georgia in 2008. I wrote a monograph with the Army War College about the Russo-Georgian War. Appeared in the early 2010s, 2012 or 13. The war was in 2008. I've been to Georgia. I've known President Saakashvili personally. Did a project through the World Bank for Saakashvili before he became president. Anyway, so the Georgians made some mistakes and pulled troops into two areas that the Russians occupied. One is called South Ossetia and other called Abkhazia. These are Georgian territory occupied already by Russia and Russian proxies. The Russian response was massive, and they tore off these territories away from Georgia and said these are autonomous states or statelets. We recognize their independence. So they severely destroyed the Georgian territorial integrity by doing that. And nobody in the world, with some few exceptions, recognized that. And I published a policy paper with the Heritage Foundation at the time and said, if we do not respond forcefully to this act of occupation, worse things will happen in Ukraine, including my birthplace, the Crimea,
Yes.
and very little response came from the West, from the United States. They sent then President of France, Sarkozy.
Why was that?
He negotiated. Why was that? Like now with Belarus, we're in the middle of the election campaign. Remember,
Yes.
August 2008, George Bush was wrapping up his second term.
Right.
And there was a contentious election campaign. McCain was the Republican candidate, the late John McCain, the senator, and Barack Obama. Obama won, but they did not have time. Bush did some things to prevent it from getting worse, to prevent Russia from occupying the capital of the Republic of Georgia. We're not talking Georgia as in peaches. We're talking Georgia as the Black Sea.
Yes.
But we did not allow the Russians to occupy the capital, Tbilisi. We got the Europeans on board. Okay, but beyond that, there was no sanctions to speak of. And the Russians said, hey, we can do the next step. And the next step, another situation that Putin took advantage of, the massive protest in Ukraine in 2014, President Yanukovych runs. Putin says, oh, there's no power in Ukraine. There's a vacuum of power. We can come and grab the Crimea, say this is a Russian territory.
Opportunity.
So this was a, opportunity, but a dangerous opportunity at that. Why? Because he started to revise the results or the borders that were created after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So if you recognize the status quo, the borders remain the same. If you don't recognize, if you say that the collapse of the Soviet Union is the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the 20th century, and you want to revise it, then you go after Ukraine, you grab territory to Russia, then you try to do the German word Anschluss, reconnection or reoccupation, the Anschluss of Belarus, and this is happening as we speak today, August 23rd.
Right.
And then you start talking about more of Ukrainian territory and northern Kazakhstan and anywhere where Russians or Russian speakers, not just ethnic Russians, but they claim special powers or special privileges anywhere a speaker of Russian lives. And that is very much similar to what Adolf Hitler did in Europe before World War II, to trying to annex Austria first. That's where the word Anschluss comes from, the Anschluss of Austria, 1938, and then immediately moving to occupy the Sudetenland, the German-speaking part of the Slovakia, and then is known, it deteriorated just as now the democracies are weak, the democracies are not standing up to bullies, and we see it now, not just with Putin, but with the greatest challenge of our lifetimes, of our century, which is China. And we need to watch very carefully what China does in the South China Sea with this artificial islands it creates, with territorial claims against all the neighbors, India, Vietnam, the Philippines, the Senkaku Islands against Japan, etc. So when a power, a great power, becomes what we call in business a revisionist power, a power that is not satisfied with the status quo, and in the case of Russia and China, they are together fighting the status quo powers, which is the United States and our allies, the Five Eyes, the English-speaking countries, the Great Britain, Australia, New Zealand, Canada. Did I forget anybody? No. So it is the status quo world against the challengers. We saw it with Germany in World War I, World War II. We saw it in the Soviet Union, which was a Cold War, if you want. World War III, as some people called it. They lost, as Reagan said, oh, this is simple. We win, they lose.
Ariel?
And now with China.
I'm wondering, and this is a very quick question, because I want to move on to the Middle East and those topics. But very quick question. How are the feelings of the Central Asian republics? Would any of them consider rejoining Putin with a new Soviet Union?
Okay, so Putin has something called the Eurasian Economic Union,
right?
Which is the first attempt, it's a first dimension of reuniting the former republics, reuniting under that this will be like the European Union. It's not like the European Union. Anything with a center in Moscow is not a European Union. Yeah, exactly. Okay, it's a Russian-run economic union, and it has also a strategic dimension called Organization for Collective Defense or Collective Security. And the Central Asians feel differently. Different countries feel differently. There are 5.
Yes.
Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. So the 2 big ones, Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, they recognize the Russian historic heritage. The elites speak Russian till this day. The older elites, the younger elites speak more of them speak English. I do consulting work there, and I travel there, so I'm quite familiar. I also
I was thinking, isn't Uzbekistan, haven't they done some coordination with the American military and the American government?
We'll get to that in a minute, but what I want to say is the 2 poor republics, the Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, they're like El Salvador and Honduras vis-a-vis the United States. 1/3 of their GDP is remittances. So they have a lot of guest workers in Russia doing unskilled labor mostly, cleaning, street sweeping, industrial production, construction. So they wouldn't mind being in some kind of Russian-run framework. The bigger countries with more economic clout, like Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, would not want to. They're real countries.
Yes.
They are playing this, what they call the multi-vector policy. So one vector is to Beijing, which is the biggest economic and regional power. The second vector to Moscow, which is the old empire. The third vector to Europe, the fourth vector to the United States, the fifth vector to the Middle East, because they're investing money from the Gulf. So they're smart. These people had statehood 1,000 years ago before the Mongol, Genghis Khan, came and smashed their statehood there. But today, it's a very interesting case because they're Muslim. They are mostly secular in terms of the elites. They're smart. They send their kids studying all over the world, especially Kazakhstan. And I'm actually, unless China or Russia comes and occupies them again, I'm quite optimistic eventually about these countries. Now you asked me another question about Uzbekistan cooperating. All of them cooperated. One, because they were very afraid that Al-Qaeda and Taliban will come in and smash them before 9/11. So they had people here in Washington talking to me about what can they do to get more American attention. And then, of course, after 9/11, when we got smashed, we started building a huge supply line, airfields, bases, depots, to project power into Afghanistan and to use not just Central Asian countries, but also Russia. Russia played ball. Putin played ball in allowing us to resupply Afghanistan. It was called Northern Distribution Network.
Wow.
And yes, and this was rails, railroads, ports, containers, airfields, refueling. The Russians were making money selling us jet fuel, for refueling. So when it comes to your interest, and that's one important lesson maybe from this talk, everybody cooperates if and when they see the confluence of their national interest. Remember, in World War II, Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Winston Churchill cooperated with this monster of a dictator, Joseph Stalin, against another monster of a dictator, Adolf Hitler. Why? Because Germany was on a tear to gain world domination together with the Japanese and Mussolini. And we were building this big coalition. And as you know, to compare a different example, most of air power and sea power, if you count planes, if you count down German aircraft, this came from the UK and the US. If you add to that the Japanese fleets that were sunk in the Pacific and Japanese air force that wiped out, the Allies beat Stalin in terms of sea power and air power. In terms of soldiers on the ground, infantry, tanks, you name it, Stalin led vis-a-vis the United States and UK. The Russians lost 27, nobody knows how many, they didn't even count, about 27 million soldiers and civilians. Actually, I saw figures as high as 42 million.
Wow.
So we lost, the United States lost about 300,000. They lost 2 orders of magnitude more people. So from 300,000 to 30 plus million. But together, the Allies won World War II against the Empire of Japan and the German Reich.
Okay, now we're going to move on to the Middle East, because I know that I have quite a few students in all of my classes who are either from the Middle East or who are also studying history. And I have a lot of history majors in my class. So in all 3 classes, what you are talking about is going to be very relevant to them. You know, the next question that we wanted to talk about is the Arab-Israeli conflict ending? It seems since the new foundation of the State of Israel in May 1948, there has been a continual historical conflict between Arabs and Israelis. And I want my students to understand this. Every summer for at least the last 2 decades or even more, Arabs have declared an intifada against Israel. Could you please explain to my students the origins of this conflict and why these perpetual conflicts continue? And from your perspective, Dr. Cohen, what would make this conflict end? What, if anything, also is Trump's MEP, Middle East peace process, and how different is Trump's plan from the former President Clinton's MEP plan? And would it work? I know that's a lot there.
Deborah, you asked enough questions to deliver a seminar or a course about the Middle East and about the Arab-Israeli conflict. Of course, we don't have time to do that.
No, you can just skeletonize it.
Yeah, we suffice it to say that the conflict has several dimensions, and I encourage the students to read literature on that from different perspectives. There's more than one perspective written. There's an Arab perspective, there's Israeli perspective, there's far left sort of deconstructionist postmodern perspective. But if we're looking at sort of traditional historic analysis, the Jewish people who were exiled from that same place we're talking about, you know, the destruction of the Second Temple, 70 AD.
Yes.
3 times a day, every day, the Jews were supposed to pray with the face toward Jerusalem. And one of the words that you say is, if I forget you or Jerusalem, my right hand would wither or sever.
Would be
so
yep.
I know that. Will be wither. So the centrality of Israel and of the land of Israel and the religious commandment to come back to Israel, which my family did from the Soviet Union back in '76. I spent 11 years there, finished high school, went to law school, served in the military. So that is a central tenet of Judaism, number one. And number two, after the Holocaust, and even before, with horrible anti-Semitism in Europe, they needed a place to go, and the doors of the United States were progressively shut down since the 1920s. Until 1920s, a lot of people from all over the world came to this country. There were very few limitations for immigration. From about World War I, the immigration was progressively shut down. So they didn't have a place to go. And after the Holocaust, they wanted to go to Israel. The Zionist movement, the movement to recreate the state, was very active since World War I. So now we're talking over 120 years, with people like Theodor Herzl writing a seminal book, the Balfour Declaration, 1917. And the Arab resistance to the Jewish national home and the Jewish state initially came from the religious dimension. The leader was the Mufti, the religious leader of Jerusalem, Hajj Amin al-Husseini, Hitler's collaborator and an instigator of the Holocaust. And in 1948, with the proclamation of the state, 5 Arab countries decided to invade, got their armies together. Egypt, Syria, the Kingdom of Transjordan, the Eastern Shore. They're not in the West Bank yet. Iraq and Lebanon, they invade. The war dragging on till 1950s. Israel loses 1% of the population. So that's the equivalent of the United States today losing 3.3 million people in the War of Independence. 1% of the population is killed in the war. The state is created, and the Arabs still do not recognize it. They don't recognize the border. There's a ceasefire. They don't recognize the border, and the flag is a flag of extermination of the Jewish state. Throw the Jews into the Mediterranean Sea. No Palestinian cause, no discussion of Palestine, of Palestinian people. They just want to eradicate Israel. And in '67, they try it again. Israel strikes preemptively at the 11th hour and wins stupendously. Takes the whole of Sinai Peninsula, the Golan Heights, and Judea and Samaria, the biblical Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, liberates Jerusalem, which was a divided city, with a wall and barbed wire like Berlin. And since then, the process of gradual recognition starts, including the peace treaty with Egypt in 1979, the Camp David Peace Treaty, 79. I was there in Israel watching on television. I was there watching President Sadat arriving to Jerusalem and making his historic 1977 speech. And he opens in the name of Allah, the magnificent, Bismillah wallahu rahim.
Well, that didn't do well for him eventually.
Right, he is killed in '81 by a spin-off.
I saw that when it happened on television. His assassination, I saw that.
And so was I. So Sadat is killed, but the peace treaty survives until this day. In '94, King Hussein of Jordan signs a peace treaty with the late Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, who gets murdered next year, '95. He gets killed by an Israeli extremist. And now, praise the Lord, we have another peace treaty with the United Arab Emirates, and we have much more opening these days with Oman, with Bahrain,
Yeah.
with Morocco, Sudan,
Good.
and others who recognize Israel is here to stay. It's a nuclear power. It has a lot to offer to its Arab neighbors, or as people in the Middle East call each other, cousins, because of Abraham,
Of
who is
course.
the father of the Arabs through who? Through Ishmael.
Yeah, through Ishmael, through Hagar, the Egyptian, his concubine.
Right, right, and father of the Jewish people through Jacob, so for Yitzchak and Jacob.
Exactly.
So anyway, we're talking about these roots, but at the same time, and let's not forget, by the way, Judaism is also the source of the two other monotheistic Abrahamic religions, right? Of Christianity and of Islam. Right.
I know, so I wrote a book about it, remember?
Wonderful.
Chasing Immortality in World Religions. I'm going to give a plug for my book, too.
Absolutely. That's what professors do. And now it's, as I said before, in foreign policy.
Yes.
The interests always override the ideological, religious, and other differences.
Oh, no.
So I gave you an example.
Excuse me. It says that they're going to snooze us for 5 minutes? Oh, my God.
Oh, no.
Wait a minute. Let me see. Oh, I'm going to dismiss that.
I think there's an override there, maybe.
I just dismissed that. But
okay, very good. So let me wrap it up by saying that yet again,
want to get into
the dynamic of Israel reaching out to and Arabs reaching out to Israel is driven by national interest of the Iranian threat and over the horizon, and maybe not so much over the horizon already, the great power threat of Turkey. The Ottoman Empire ruled the Middle East for hundreds of years, and the Jews and the Arabs recognize that if Turkey gets too strong and meddling in places as they do already, Syria and Libya, and supporting Hamas, the Islamist Palestinian jihadi movement. So they want to stop, or they want to collaborate with the Israelis. And also the final point about this collaboration, Israel is viewed as a more dynamic society, socially and economically, something that is lacking in these Arab states, and especially in the monarchies, because the moment your oil and gas goes away and ceases to give you your revenue, they will be at a disadvantage, to put it mildly. Some of them can do tourism, transportation, big airlines, airports, etc. But the bottom line is they need more technology, more education, and they think Israelis can help them with that.
Let's not forget that Turkey has control of the Tigris and Euphrates through their dam system also, and they could turn off the taps, right? For
and they also have control, and they also have
control for Jordan and Syria and Iraq.
Right.
So let's move on to the 2020 riots. Okay, and what's at stake there? Everyone is following the results of the death of George Floyd at the knees of the Minnesota police. Now, this was the flame that ignited all these protests this summer and riots in major and minor cities in the United States. So in the midst of these protests, there appears to have been a highly organized group of anarchists who deliberately created carnage by setting fires, looting, damaging businesses and housing, etc. So I think that my students would like to know, what is at stake for our country as a result of these riots? And these protests have led to a call to defund police departments across the country. Is this really a viable option, do you think, Dr. Cohen? And what do you think about the dismantling of historical statues across the United States? I mean, you don't have to answer all of those questions, but if you could speak to a few of them, I'd really appreciate it. Yeah.
Right. Well, when I came here as an immigrant in '87,
Yeah.
the view of America, to me, the country that stood for democracy, human rights, fought communism, fought totalitarianism, defeated Hitler and the Japanese. To me, the shining city on the hill, as Ronald Reagan called it, was so high that I failed to see the blemishes.
Yeah.
And so the systemic racism in this country is more than a blemish, it's a disease. Yes. But you have in political science, in politics and policy, you have to make, and in law too, by the way, I'm trained as a lawyer, you have to make a balance, you have to make a balance of interests. And I think that, to me, again, as a minority, as an immigrant, as a person whose native language was Russian and not English, I studied English since the age of 5, but it's not my first language. To me, this country gave me opportunities and gave my wife and my kids opportunities that I do not want to destroy it and throw the baby with the bathwater.
Yes.
I recognize now, after 30 plus years here, that there is racism in this country, no question about it.
Yes, definitely.
There is anti-Muslim feelings, Islamophobia that goes beyond the opposition to radical, violent forms of Islam.
And anti-Semitism.
I was getting there.
Okay.
There is anti-Semitism. People said things to me in my face that I do not want to repeat here.
No, don't.
Having said that, the founding fathers never claimed that this is the ideal society. We'll get to the ideal society, depends on what religion you are, when we get up to the heaven, and then depends where you get.
Yeah.
You can get to a society or an environment that is quite unpleasant if you get to hell or the purgatory. If you get to paradise, it's supposed to be ideal, right? You ask a person in the Middle East, you go to paradise, what happened there? So, oh, this is like five-star hotel. Well, not necessarily my idea of paradise. But anyway, the radical groups that you see burning and looting,
yes,
they want to destroy this society as we know it. And when you start looking into what do they offer sort of rehashed, warmed up version of extreme socialism or communism that we saw failed in North Korea, in Cambodia with 1/3 of the population exterminated, in East Germany with its wall that people got killed year after year, day after day, trying to escape, in the Soviet Union when they killed my grandfather for nothing, literally, because he was a statistic. They were killing people by quota. They were killing people through collectivized, organized starvation in the Soviet Union.
Yes, I read about that.
Yes, we need to recognize the defects, the drawbacks, the racism, and other things. Look at our health system. Our health system did not manage to cope with the challenge of COVID-19. More people died.
How unprepared we were.
And I wrote about it. I had an article in Newsweek and
yes, I saw that
in the Hill. But 170,000 people died of COVID. The police violence, justified or unjustified. Sometimes a cop needs to shoot back to save his life.
Well, of course.
The police killings are not 170,000 a year. There may be the high estimates, 1,000 a year, and every life snuffed unjustifiably is a tragedy. But defunding the police is opening the door to anarchy. It will not work. Yeah, you can train them. You can give them better money. You can pay them more. I have neighbors who are policemen and policewomen. They're getting $40,000 and $50,000 a year. You probably need to pay professors and teachers more to get a better
Let's not
education
talk
system.
about teacher pay.
Right, right. That's what I'm talking about.
Exactly.
So, do we need to work on improving life and correcting systemic inequalities or defects in our country? Of course.
Yes.
This is what electoral politics is about. It's not only about race. It's not only about, you know, which bathrooms boys and girls should be using.
Right.
As far as I'm concerned, we can have a unisex bathroom.
Who cares?
Everybody should. Who cares? Right. But our infrastructure is deteriorating. When I travel, I see much better airports in China, for crying out loud. Better roads in Asia or in Europe, right? So even in Russia, they improved the quality of their roads. They had horrible roads before. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is, let us not throw the baby with the bathwater.
Right.
Let's respect our police. Let's pay our police. Let's train our police and make them responsible when they screw up.
Well, you know, I'm glad that you were talking about infrastructure, because my friends and I the other day were talking about the fact that one of the detriments to, of course, Trump getting reelected are all the promises that he made about new train stations, new roads, new bridges, you know, new airports, and none of that has been done.
You need a bipartisan. I worked with Congress people and congressional staff. The infrastructure bill has to be a bipartisan bill. We're talking a lot of money.
Right.
Trump was talking $1 trillion. Trump was talking $1 trillion. Joe Biden is talking $2 trillion. We are, as a federal government, 23 or 25 trillion dollars in debt.
Oh, I know. It's just awful.
And we're spending money like a drunken sailor.
I know.
We are not balancing the budget. The last budget that was balanced was under Bill Clinton. So while I recognize we need to wrap up, we're out of time. But I'll be happy to come back next year for your next course.
Oh my goodness. I'm telling you, it has been such a delight. Such a delight. And I, you know, we're really, really grateful. And on behalf of my students and on behalf of the University of Toledo, we really thank you for your generosity in appearing today. Thank you so much.
And God bless.
I do have a question. I am going to put this through Microsoft Movie Maker, and then I'm going to upload it to YouTube. Okay? And do I have your permission, of course, to put it on my Blackboard site and put it on Facebook?
Yeah, and send me the link. I'll put it on my social media.
Of course I'm going to. Be the first thing I do. All right, thank you so much,
Thanks
Dr.
a lot.
Cohen. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.